What's up, everyone? Hope you're having a wonderful week. It's been a hot minute since we've done a History Of episode, so today we're making up for lost time with a character who's not given nearly enough love, and that would be Mr. Miracle. Now, you guys may or may not know this, but I'm a pretty big fan of DC's New Gods. In fact, their appearances in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series were some of the best episodes. With that said, Mr. Miracle is easily one of the most interesting of the New Gods. Not to mention his 2017 solo series, written by Tom King, was fantastic. So let's take a look at what this underrated DC hero is all about. Mr. Miracle was created by the one and only Jack Kirby, first appearing in Mr. Miracle issue 1 in 1971. Mr. Miracle was created to be part of Kirby's Fourth World race, which was famously known as the New Gods. He is the son of Highfather, leader of New Genesis. Anyway, Kirby took inspiration from one of his peers and fellow comic book icon Jim Steranko, as Steranko was also a real-life escape artist and magician. And Kirby used that part of Steranko's career and loosely based Mr. Miracle on him. But let's take a look at his comic book origin, shall we? Now, there have been several different people to take on the role of Mr. Miracle. The first was Thaddeus Brown, then Scott Free, and finally, Shiloh Norman. With that said, I'm only going to be focusing on Scott Free, as that is the main and most popular version of the character. Also, Mr. Miracle's origin hasn't really changed too drastically over the years in comics, so I'm going to stick with his original. Mr. Miracle was one of the pawns in an arrangement between Darkseid and Highfather, which in turn would establish peace between Apokolips and New Genesis. Planet Apokolips basically being the yin to Genesis's yang. In a nutshell, Highfather gave his son to Darkseid, and Darkseid gave his son Orion to Highfather to broker the treaty. With Highfather and New Genesis being the light, Orion was given a life of privilege and entitlement among the other new gods. However, the same couldn't be said for Highfather's son, who would later become Mr. Miracle. On Apokolips, Darkseid tried to crush and corrupt the nameless boy at Granny Goodness's Terra Orphanage, who, by the way, is an awesome character. But the boy, with no knowledge of his own heritage, was still strong-willed, and his spirit would not be crushed. He resisted every attempt to break him and never gave up hope of one day being free. The training he received turned him into a cunning thinker and remarkable athlete, fueling his extraordinary escape artist abilities. His incredible escape abilities eventually led to him escaping Granny's orphanage, and because of this, he realized that he could escape anything. This led to him taking the name Scott Free, which is obviously a fun little play on words. Anyway, he fled to Earth, where he met Thaddeus Brown, the first man to go by the name Mr. Miracle. Brown was a circus entertainer and escape artist whose stage name was again Mr. Miracle. But this is comics, so of course tragedy is right around the corner, and Thaddeus was murdered. So Scott, wanting justice for his friend, used Thaddeus's costume as a disguise, taking on the persona of Mr. Miracle, and then tracked down the person responsible for his friend's death. And just like that, Mr. Miracle was born. He was also reunited with his love, Big Barda, who had also been a prisoner at the orphanage. The two would later go on to get married. Now, even though Mr. Miracle is a pretty well-known character within the comic book community, his history in comics is surprisingly not that extensive. In any case, let's pick up where we left off with his origin. After Scott became the new Mr. Miracle, his lady friend Big Barda followed him to Earth. On Earth, the two used their new god powers, equipment, and skills in the war against Darkseid, who was constantly trying to recapture his prisoners. Eventually, tired of being hunted on Earth by Darkseid's servants, Scott was like, forget this, I'm just gonna go to Apokolips and win my freedom by legal means through trial by combat. Scott would later go on to become a member of Justice League International, along with his now wife Big Barda and his longtime friend Oberon. The book was very popular, but had more of a comedic take that in turn made Mr. Miracle and Big Barda semi-retired superheroes that sought to live quiet lives in the suburbs when they were not involved with Justice League missions. To give the book more of a comedic tone, they made the now married Mr. Miracle a husband who was constantly being nagged by his wife, and he was often on the receiving end of his wife's temper, as she just wanted to live a quiet life on Earth and not get too caught up in the superhero business. During the course of the book and his time in the League, Scott developed a massive rivalry with Justice League villain Manga Khan, who was an intergalactic traitor with a penchant for melodrama. Manga Khan repeatedly kidnapped Scott and ultimately had Funky Flashman, who was a master con artist also created by Jack Kirby, forge documents forcing Scott to work for Manga as his personal entertainer. Sounds crazy and extremely weird, right? It gets better. Khan replaced Scott with a lifelike robot that was eventually murdered by Despero on his first mission with the Justice League. Of course, Scott ultimately escaped from Khan because, well, that's what he's all about, and reunited with his wife and friends. But he didn't get out of the situation scot-free. The shock from what happened caused Scott to ultimately quit the League, retiring his superhero persona, and then take on a protege named Shiloh Norman. Shiloh was a master escape artist himself and would later become the third Mr. Miracle for a short time, while Scott was retired. During the death of the New Gods storyline, Barda was killed, which of course made Scott more unstable than ever, so he threw himself into Superman and Orion's investigation. Scott eventually acquired the anti-life equation and let it take him over. Blaming Orion for his wife's death, Scott tried to kill him, only for Orion to reveal that he was attempting to draw the murderer out and wasn't the murderer himself. Superman would later find out that Barda's real murderer was Infinity Man. Scott unleashed the equation to try to kill the Infinity Man, only for Infinity Man to reveal that he was an agent of the Source, attempting to reunite with the Anti-Life and create a fifth world. Long story short, Scott was ultimately killed by Infinity Man. But what do I always say? This is comic books, so no one permanently stays dead unless you're the parent whose death created a hero. And Mr. Miracle and Big Barda were no exception, as they were eventually brought back during a crisis event, of course. More currently, Mr. Miracle has been seen in DC's New 52. In this new timeline, Mr. Miracle appears alongside Big Barda, flying around the ruins of Gotham City on Earth 2. Their purpose is revealed to find the mysterious new Batman, which is interrupted when both are attacked by Fury. We were also given an updated yet not too drastically changed origin of Mr. Miracle in the Darkseid War storyline. He played a pretty decent role in that story, along with Barda, helping the League defeat both Darkseid and the Anti-Monitor. And most recently in 2017, Mr. Miracle was given his own solo series, yet again written by Tom King. I haven't read the entire 10-issue run, but the issues I did read were awesome and gives a very interesting, unique take and look into Scott's life. With that said, however, let's talk about some powers and abilities. Like all New Gods, Scott Free's lifespan is quite long. In fact, he's practically immortal. And as a New God, all of his physical abilities are superhuman, which in turn gives him superhuman strength, speed, stamina, intellect, dexterity, agility, reflexes, healing, invulnerability, and so much more. Scott also possesses the Alpha effect, which is the contrary power of Darkseid's Omega effect. These abilities are said to reach an almost unlimited scale, as told by Darkseid himself. And through the Alpha effect, Scott Free can do some crazy stuff. A few examples would be resurrection, energy manipulation, space-time migration, heal others, space-dimensional travel, and the list goes on. And last but certainly not least, Scott possesses full knowledge of the whole anti-life equation, which is a cosmic level power with which he can dictate the very life choices of all things in the universe, which allows him to increase his own physical abilities and dominate the will of any being in the universe. Altogether, this guy is way more powerful than many of you may have thought. As for reading recommendations, read Mr. Miracle's first 1971 series, read the original New God series, Justice League International Volume 1, Mr. Miracle by Jack Kirby, and Mr. Miracle's newest 2017 series by Tom King. First up for Wednesday, August 15th, we have Batwoman issue 18. In this series finale, there's a lot of drama to resolve for Kate Kane, both in and out of costume. Now we have Batgirl issue 25. On her return to Gotham City, Family Matters force Barbara to confront her complicated relationship with Dick Grayson. Here we have Extermination issue 1. Cyclops, Iceman, Angel, Beast, and Marvel Girl. The original team of Teen Mutants brought together by Professor X many years ago have been shunted through time to find a world they barely recognize, but were determined to help. Next we have Edge of Spider-Geddon issue 1. Spider-Punk is back and better than ever. After Spider-Verse, Hobie Brown was a web warrior, but that didn't mean things back on his universe were solved. And finally, we have Infinity Wars issue 2. Who controls the Infinity Stones? The war has begun to control Infinity, and the war has come to Earth. And that's gonna bring another episode of Variant to a close. Also, be sure to check out our website, variantcomics.com. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things comics.